Thank you both for the real honor having you with us here today at the Press Freedom Executive Forum. With all our esteemed guests on behalf of the Association of Foreign Press Correspondents. Dr. Tawfik Jelassi, you're going to allow me to start with Lally Weymouth because she's our honorary awardee this year. And I would like to ask you, Lally, because you have been interviewing world leaders from around the world, from Washington Post. You can take the microphone, yes. And given the fact that you've been speaking directly with several world leaders, including world leaders from countries where democracies are not as stable as here in the United States, how do you see the role of the US media, the US media, the role that the US media can play in order to advance press freedom around the globe in other countries? So
how do I see the role that
the US media, like the Washington Post, the role that Washington Post and other US media can play?
Like in Ukraine, for example?
Absolutely.
I think that both the European countries and the United States, and actually the current administration, has been really quite supportive of Ukraine. And just as you suggested, the gentleman here, journalists have paid a high price, both in all over the world, as you know. I know many journalists, both I've worked, and to be blunt, my family's owned Newsweek and the Washington Post. And over the years, I've seen people be in prison in Iran, journalists, and they paid a high price, and they got out, fortunately, eventually, most of them. But, and Navalny, of course, is today's Washington Post lead editorial, which I thought was excellent, and they were basically calling on the international media to shine a spotlight on the fate of Navalny, who's already in jail. As you know, he's the Russian opposition leader, and he's already in jail for 11 and a half years. And what the Post editorial is explaining in detail is that he faces another 30 years for so-called terrorism, which is a pretty hoped up charge, at least according to all the journalists, and also according to the Post editorial, and according to everything I've read, actually, and according to his own family. And apparently he's in a cell where he has to stay standing up. And it sounds like a real nightmare. He's deprived of visits from his family. So he's a really major case in point, I would say. I don't know what you would say, but I would say that Navalny is really, he was a bit mad to go back to Russia, but he was courageous too. And he's suffered a terrible fate.
Dr. Tawfik, we would like to have your comment on that. Do you agree with what Lally just mentioned, and if you see other cases, pressing cases that you can bring up?
Thank you, Thanos, for the opportunity, and thank you to all of you and for the foreign press correspondence. Maybe I would like to take a broader view.
And the broader question would be, what do you think are the most pressing issues right now in the global scale from your role as Assistant Director General of Unesco on Press Freedom Division? What is the number 3 priorities?
Well, clearly there are a number of priorities. Number one, our recent research study shows that 85% of respondents to our major survey reveal declining press freedom in their country. 73%. So clearly this is alarming. Number two, our study shows that 73% of women journalists are subject to online harassment, and that 20% of them end up being physically attacked. This is very alarming as well. Let me give you a quote that I heard from the ambassador of Sweden, or the delegate of Sweden to UNESCO. When I mentioned these statistics to him, he said, in Sweden, 1 in 5 women journalists quit her job because she couldn't take it any longer with online harassment. I'm talking about Sweden. So what I shared with you so far 3 statistics. What we see an exponential growth or exponential increase in online harassment, in cyberbullying, targeting journalists in particular, and we see this decline worldwide in press freedom. And therefore, we have to do something about it, collectively.
Well,
Absolutely.
it's a bit better.
Your microphone, please.
It'd be a bit better to be in Sweden, no offense, than to be in a Russian jail, I'd say. I visited, and also I think that I'm not touting, of course, I am touting a bit the Washington Post, but I know that journalists have been fantastic, and the Times too. So I'm not discriminating, but Aung San Suu Kyi, our editorial page editor, is now deceased, unfortunately, Fred Hyatt, campaigned ceaselessly for the release of Aung San Suu Kyi in Myanmar, and I was so fortunate to, and he actually succeeded. And he beat up on the generals endlessly for years and years and years to release Aung San Suu Kyi. And I was very fortunate to get the first interview with her when she was released from so-called house arrest, which she was under for years. And I asked her, like, what in the world did you do in this house? She really was in this house, which was quite a beautiful house and all that, but she was there all alone. So she said that she learned the internet. But she said, of course, they didn't have any internet, so she just sent herself, she said she learned, and she sent herself invitations to things. Of course, there was nothing to invite herself to. So she just made up invitations, and so that's the way she divided her time, and reading and so on and so forth. But anyway, she's a really impressive woman, I thought. I've interviewed her twice. And now, unfortunately, she's back in jail again. And I have to say, I also had the honor, so-called, of interviewing the lead general who put her back in jail. And it's just unbelievable that she's back in jail again. But I would say that's another case where she was touted by the world. She was given every prize in the world when she was out. And now, bang, and the generals have done a pretty good job of hushing that up, wouldn't you say? Aung San Suu Kyi, you don't hear word one, right, from Burma, or so-called Myanmar. Done. There's so many, you know more than I do, but there's so many really famous political prisoners.
Would you both agree that the way that journalists are treated is not related to the type of democracy or how strong democracies are? We can find cases where press freedom is under attack, even in strong democracies. And my question is, do you think that the factor of the political leadership in each country plays a significant role, and to what extent? If there is a country where political leaders are tolerant to criticism, are open to free media and to criticism and reporting, truthful reporting, do you think that this might be the key for a more solid and strong freedom of the press in these countries? Jelassi.
I think that's right.
Obviously, you can understand I cannot comment on specific countries. Being Unesco, I have to stay neutral, objective vis-a-vis our member states. But we defend the cause. The cause is the freedom of the press, the freedom of expression, the safety of journalists, in particular women journalists, as I suggested before. I think the only remark I would make on this point is we have been seeing through digital platforms a lot of manipulation, a lot of instrumentalization, including by political leaders, to influence whether it's voters at elections, and we are on the eve of 90 elections to take place by the end of next year. There will be 2 billion voters going to cast their ballot by the end of next year. To what extent are digital platforms being manipulated, instrumentalized in order to influence, especially undecided voters, but also to hinder the integrity of electoral processes in so many countries? And there were many press articles and studies that revealed in dozens of countries so far, digital platforms were used to influence the outcome of some elections, including in democratic regimes or societies. So for us, we initiated last year a major initiative called Internet for Trust in order to suggest with all stakeholders, including the media, including the tech companies of the member states and civil society organizations, to draft guidelines for regulating digital platforms while safeguarding freedom of speech and freedom of the press, freedom of expression online. And this is the difficult thing. How can we regulate while we safeguard freedom of speech? So far, so good. We aim at publishing our guidelines. This is not a binding convention. It's not a binding recommendation. It is a set of guidelines with the commitment of the tech companies that operate the platforms to respect them and implement them. These will be released next September at the UNGA.
We're looking forward to that. And because, Lally, we spoke about how women journalists usually are being attacked, harassed online, what is your message to the women journalists who are trying to do their job with the same strength and passion you had when you started your career? And what would you like to say to them, given the current environment of misinformation, harassment, intimidation in multiple countries?
Well, I mean, to look at the other side of the coin, I mean, when I started my career, there were many fewer women journalists. And I think it's fantastic that there are many more women journalists and many more successful journalists today. And your question is valid, but I think that on the upside, it's great to look around and you turn on the TV set or you look anywhere, and they're tremendous. There's, like, it used to be like, I used to be like a very rare species, like there were like few women journalists and a lot of men journalists. And today it's really 50-50. And so and on my mother's day, when she was taking over the Washington Post, she was the only CEO in the room. They were like all men, and she was the only woman in the room. So I think on the more positive side, that women have made tremendous. I'm sure that there's harassment and all this stuff, and I think it's terrible, etc. But I do think, looking at the more positive side, that women have made tremendous strides and really done well, and it's fantastic to see women really break the glass ceiling and make so many achievements. I'm sure they can make many more, but I think it's incredible. Starting like when I saw my mother, I wrote my mother's speech from when she was taking it. My father died, and my mother took over the Washington Post many years ago, before you were probably born, most of you. And really, there were just absolutely no women around. There were no women in the workforce, literally. I think there might have been one woman in the newspaper at that point. So, I mean, it's really extraordinary to see you thinking like this is a really big problem. I would say there's a really big advancement, but as you say, at different times and different problems. But it is on. I would be upside.
Before we conclude, one last question, Jelassi. We have
They have a new woman editor at the Wall Street Journal, I would like to say. And I actually don't know. I've met her, but I don't know her. Emma Tucker, but she's supposed to be enormously capable, for example.
What would you say to a journalist who is getting into journalism now, starting his or her career in journalism, in whatever country, and come to you and ask you how UNESCO Press Freedom Division helps me do my job freely in a practical sense, and what should they expect from you as a journalist? If you would ask this question, what would be your answer?
Well, UNESCO has been taking a number of initiatives, not only for new journalists, but also in conflict zones, in post-conflict zones, in war zones. We are one of the very first, late March, early April, to be in Ukraine, to have UNESCO staff in Ukraine, few weeks after the start of the war. We worked with NUJU, the National Union of Ukrainian Journalists, and other partners, the International Federation of Journalists and others, to provide safety equipment to journalists, to hundreds of them, to set up safe working spaces, to journalists, to set up community radios, not only inside Ukraine, but in the 5 neighboring countries, so we can provide fact-checked information to the refugees. Not journalists working in Ukraine, not only Ukraine, but foreign journalists as well. In Afghanistan, in August 2021, we had to evacuate some journalists who received death threats. Some we brought them to France, brought them visa, papers, financial support. Some we took them to Pakistan, and we set up safe working spaces for them there. So, no, we don't. These are UNESCO tasks, not with the US. No, we did not work with the US with our operation. Our office is operational in Kabul. We have a team on site. We have been having a team there. We didn't work with the specific countries, but we had our own team, our own operation. So the last thing I would mention is the UNESCO Guillermo Cano World Press Freedom Prize, which we have been awarding for 26 years now. Tomorrow evening, we'll award the 2023 UNESCO Guillermo Cano World Press Freedom Prize. We are humbled but very honored that the last 2 years laureate of our prize received 6 months later the Nobel Peace Prize. Maria Ressa, 2021. And then last year it was the Belarusian Association of Journalists. We'll see tomorrow. We'll stay tuned, watch the news. There'll be a very, very strong political message. Last year it was the Belarusian Association of Journalists who received our prize. And this was May 2022. But these are not Belarusian journalists. Sorry. But these are opponents to the regime. These are the journalists who have been critical voices to them.
But I interviewed the president of Belarus, and they dubbed the tape.
The award went to the one who received the 2022 Nobel Peace Prize for the courage, the perseveration in bringing truth to power. It didn't go for
and we'll forward to tomorrow.
Yes, sir. Well, the news are under embargo. So, but you'll see tomorrow who will be the winner for it.
Lally, before we conclude, one last question for you. I know that Phil Graham, the publisher of Washington Post, and your father was saying that journalism is the first draft of history.
Journalism.
Journalism.
Yeah.
Catherine Graham, if I'm right, she was saying that in democracies there should be free circulation of information if we want to have a strong democracy. How the fact that you are coming from 2 parents who have been so involved in the news industry, from one of the pioneers in media, Washington Post, how does this save your career? And also, what opportunities created for you, and how did you use these opportunities for in favor for the sake of journalism?
I don't know if it's about me. I just think it was a fantastic way to grow up, in Georgetown. And, it was a very casual Georgetown. Republicans and Democrats, if you can believe it, actually were friends. They spoke, they came to our house. Alan Dulles, the head of the CIA, would wander in. President Kennedy would come over. I mean, it was really an amazing childhood. We didn't realize how amazing it was, of course, until we got to college. Scotty Reston, the famous, you're too young again, but he was the most famous New York Times columnist. He would come to dinner all the time. We were allowed, my older brother, my oldest brother, and I were allowed to sit with all these people at the table. It was really a blast. So I think that it was an inspiration, really. And as you said, my brother said that journalism is the first rough draft of history that's been repeated over and over again. He never gets credit, but he deserves it. And I think my parents' passionate belief in freedom of the press and wouldn't say they actually be in tune with today's world, but in the United States, and they were passionate, about the country. And I think it was a fantastic way to grow up and a fantastic childhood, fantastic example, more than how to help me, but and two people to admire. Thank you, Thanos, for this.
Thank you for the honor.